Samurai Talk. I'm your host, Kuryu Matsumoto. I will offer you today our Samurai Talk special. Our host for today is Hiromi Yano. Mr. Yano and I've known each other for several years, sharing thoughts and emotions. Today, he will be sharing on our behalf our thoughts and emotions with a friend of his, freelance writer, BillRoberts. And if you people get curious, get an urge to take on this task of interviewing a big-time person and bringing your guest and whatever you call it, challenge corner, a challenge or gate crushers program. So back to Mr. Yano's interview. Here is Mr. Yano interviewing Mr. BillRoberts.
Welcome to None's channel, Global Inside, a special edition sponsored by Matsumoto Japan. I am Hiromi Yano. There are so many people who visited Japan. They said, I love Japan. We love Japan. We really like Japanese life. I don't doubt they mean what they say. And also, I have visited many countries, and objectively speaking, Japan is a very attractive country in many ways. But I was born in Japan and was raised in Japan, so it might be difficult to judge about my own country in a very objective way. You know, as you get older, your love towards your country is getting more and more deepening. So it is very difficult to judge objectively what Japan is. But still, Japan is a beautiful country. I like to say that. But I'm not the person who asks a visitor for the first time they come and they ask, and do you like Japanese food? Or do you really like Japan? I don't ask that question at the beginning. Anyway, today we have a guest from United States who's been in Japan for many, many times, and he always said he loved Japan. Let's ask him, what is the reason that he really getting into Japan? So please join me in welcoming BillRoberts. Thank you for coming, Bill.
Very happy to be here.
My first question is, do you like Japanese food?
Yes, I do. I like sushi, tempura, udon. There's only two things I don't like: natto and mackerel.
Okay. So next important question is, do you like Japan?
I love Japan.
Okay. So BillRoberts likes Japan and likes Japanese food. We will ask him more. But before that, I'd like to ask him, you've been a journalist for many years, and can you tell us a little bit about your background and your career?
Sure. I've spent more than 40 years as a writer, reporter, and editor at magazines, newspapers, wire services, and in corporate publishing. I started off spending the first 15 years in daily newspapers. I worked at small dailies in the southern United States, and then I graduated to large metropolitan newspapers, Detroit, Michigan, and San Jose, California. I also spent some time at the International Herald Tribune in Paris, and I finished my news career as the managing editor of a financial news service based in London. I then went on and did 5 years as an editorial executive at computer magazines in Silicon Valley, in San Jose, Silicon Valley. And for the last 22 years, I've been a freelance writer and editor, mostly writing. I write for magazines, websites, and corporate clients.
I'm sure you have been involved in many, many important events at home and international field. Can you tell us a little bit?
Certainly, especially in my newspaper career, my news career, where I was mostly an editor, directing reporters and supervising reporters. I was responsible for coverage of the Persian Gulf War, 1991,
Okay.
and I directed coverage over the years of the Israeli-Palestine conflict, the anti-apartheid effort in South Africa, the Solidarity movement in Poland, the 1988 presidential elections in the United States, and the auto industry strike and contract negotiations in 1984. That was as an editor, directing others who covered those. My big moment was really in 1989 when, for one night, I became a reporter again and helped cover the devastating earthquake in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Wow, tell us what happened.
Well, it's an interesting story. I was working as an editor at the newspaper, the San Jose Mercury News, which is the daily newspaper of Silicon Valley. I'd gone home early that night, and at home, the earthquake happened, and as any journalist would do, I called the news desk. I said, "What do you need me to do?" I knew this was a big, big story. I thought they'd ask me to come back in and help with editing, because that was my main function. They said, "We don't have any reporters where you are.
Okay.
Get a notebook and start doing some reporting." So to make kind of a long story short, from listening to the radio, I had determined that one of the worst hit towns was a little town in the mountains called Felton, very near the epicenter, and that the roads were closed. But I knew some back roads, and I wondered if they were open, so I took the back roads and got into Felton, and I was the first reporter there. So I started taking notes, interviewing people, making observations. One or two things I'll share with you. People were just walking up and down the street like they were still in shock. Many of them were afraid to go back into their houses. People were pitching tents in a city park to sleep for the night. And every business on the main street, there was only one main street there, every business had lost its windows. The glass was all in the street. So this was before cell phones. So I found a old-fashioned telephone that worked finally, and I called all my notes into the newspaper, and they were used extensively in the coverage the next day.
Very interesting stories.
Yeah. And the newspaper was awarded the Pulitzer Prize, one of the major awards for journalism in America.
Everybody knows that.
And it was awarded to the entire staff, not to anybody by name. And I always felt like I did my share of the work to earn that
Whoa,
prize.
that's very impressive. What are stories? You mentioned before earlier that you became very much interested in Israeli-Palestinian conflict and Gulf War. What was the beginning of your interest in the region?
I spent a year of my undergraduate college days studying Middle Eastern politics and Israeli government at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. That was the 1971 to 72 school year.
Well, I know several Americans who have been studying at Hebrew University or Tel Aviv universities. Most of them are Jewish Americans. You are not Jewish, right?
No, I'm not Jewish, and I was one of the very few non-Jewish students at the Hebrew University that year. Most of the foreign students were American Jews or European Jews, and there were very few of us who weren't. We figured out who we were pretty early on, and the Hebrew word for non-Jew is goy.
Goy.
So we used to joke that the Goy Student Association would hold meetings in a phone booth.
Okay. But seriously, what was it like being a non-Jew studying at the Hebrew universities?
It was really at least two cultural experiences, very different cultural experiences. First, there was the American Jewish culture, which I had never had any exposure to in America. And so I was learning about American Jews and what they do and think and all. And then there was the Israeli culture, and that was very different from American Jewish culture. Believe me, those two cultures are quite different. In fact, I know this is subjective, but you know, I would say that most of the American Jews had a harder time adjusting to Israeli culture than the non-Jews did, for this reason. Growing up, they had this beautiful picture of Israel painted.
They had,
You know, it was kind of a myth of Israel, and the realities were very different. So that was a real adjustment for them. I had had no expectations about either American Jews or Israeli culture, and it was much easier to adjust.
Any other cross-cultural experience when you were in Israel?
Yeah, it was quite a year in that regard. And let me give you two examples.
Yeah.
I tutored a junior high school boy in English once a week. Now he was from a Turkish Jewish family from Turkey,
I see.
not from Europe. And I met his family, I went into his home, and I learned that they were really second-class citizens, that the elite in Israeli society were the European Jews who had immigrated to Palestine. So that was a very interesting thing. And then the other one was I spent a full month working on a kibbutz. A kibbutz is a communal farm. It was very non-religious, very secular, and that was a real different experience of Israel than going to school.
Okay, but you have just 1 year. I'm sure you had many experience, and you encountered just one or two experiences, but many during your stay in Israel.
It was multifaceted.
How much you prepared to encounter the different cultures or your background?
Well, I don't know the anything you really do to prepare for this stuff, but I did grow up in a military family, and we moved around a lot. We moved almost every year when I was young, all over the United States. So I experienced really different cultures within the United States, and then when I was 8 years old, we moved to Europe, and we were in France and then in Germany, and we were in Europe more than 3 years. And we traveled all over Europe, so you know I had at a very young age a lot of exposure to different cultures.
So you really had background to learn or live in a different culture.
Yes.
Fascinating. Well, let's talk a little bit about Middle East project. As you know, I have been conducting the Middle East Peace Project, and which started in Ayabi 2003. We try to bring Israeli and Palestinian teenagers and give them the cross-cultural experience in Japan, along with Japanese counterpart. And they not only just to talk, they experience completely different culture, which is Japanese, and also we give them the chance to mingle, talk about what they are and how different they are, how alike they are. And then, when we started the project, I suggested to the mayor then, Ayabe mayor, we include BillRoberts as a staff because he was in Jerusalem. He speaks a little bit Hebrew and Arabic, and he really helped us to organize and take a good pictures and write the report, and that was a really good things that we did to include BillRoberts to our team. Thank you for helping us.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure I helped all that much.
Oh, you did.
I did take a lot of photos. It was one of my early endeavors in digital photography. Talk about that more about that later. And I did write an article. What really struck me about it was how much these kids are alike, but didn't know that they were alike. And they really had no experience of the other side, as it were. So I think bringing them together and putting them in a place where they had to communicate and experience each other was just an incredible thing to do.
Yeah, you also joined the interface group of Japanese on a tour I led to Jerusalem and Haifa in 2013. What was your reaction to that?
So that was 2013. That was my first time back to Jerusalem since I was a student there more than 40 years earlier. And I was shocked at how much everything had changed, especially Jerusalem. I think the population was 5 times larger. There was construction every place. I tried to find a dormitory that I lived in when I was a student. I had a hard time finding it. I finally did, but everything was different. And then, so that was one reaction. And then the other thing that was really surprised to me was I had read about and I knew about this wall that the Israelis built between Israel and Palestine. But until I saw it, you know, I didn't really understand completely how divisive, how dividing this wall really is. So that was a big eye-opener for me. And I really think this is why the kind of project you were doing, that the city of Ayabe was doing, bringing kids together, is so important. And I think Japan could do a lot more of that if it wanted to. Maybe you could rebrand it as the Tear Down the Wall Project.
Yeah, what an intriguing notion. Okay, this is the end of the first part. We'll be back in a second part soon. In the second part, we'll ask BillRoberts more about how and why he came first to Japan. Stay tuned. This is Hiromi Yano for Knowledge Channel, Tokyo, Japan.